He was just living his life, tending to his ranch, paying his bills, and keeping to himself. Yet every few weeks his mailbox lay in ruins, flattened, twisted, destroyed, while the people sworn to protect the neighborhood watched and did nothing. It wasn't accidents. It was deliberate. Every strike carried a message, a reminder that some people didn't think he belonged, didn't think his property mattered. But how far would they go to push him out? And what would he have to do to finally make them stop? He thought he could ignore it. But what came next would change everything. Curtis Delaney had spent decades building his life from the ground up. His ranch wasn't huge by Texas standards, but it was his pride. Fenced pastures, a modest farmhouse, and a workshop where he welded, fixed, and crafted. Mornings began feeding cattle. Evenings ended on the porch with his wife Renee, watching. The sun sink behind the horizon. Life was quiet, predictable, the kind of steady rhythm he had earned through hard work and patience. But lately, something felt off. Mailboxes he installed kept getting destroyed, over and over, by the very patrols, meant to protect the neighborhood. Each crash wasn't just property damage, it was a silent, pointed message. Curtis tried to shrug it off, tried to tell himself it was coincidence, but deep down, he knew someone or something was targeting him, and he was running out of patience. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning, and what he was about to do next would ignite a battle nobody saw coming. Curtis Delaney couldn't ignore it anymore. Week after week, the same patrol cars drove down his road, their tires crushing the mailbox he had installed just days before. Each time he heard the sickening thud from inside his shop, the metallic groan echoing like a warning. He'd rush outside, boots crunching on gravel, only to see another mangled post leaning at a broken angle, the white SUV disappearing down the road as if nothing had happened. Neighbors whispered behind hands, some shaking their heads, others looking away, unwilling or afraid to get involved. He had replaced that mailbox 4 times in 6 months, each one costing money and labor he could hardly spare. Yet the destruction never stopped. Curtis began keeping track, marking each incident like tally marks on a wall, each thud a cruel reminder that he was being singled out. It wasn't the road. The other mailboxes along FM 89 stood crooked from years of weather and neglect, untouched by those same patrol vehicles. The pattern was unmistakable. At HOA meetings, Curtis tried to speak. His voice carried across the fluorescent-lit room as he pointed out the repeated destruction, explaining how these so-called protectors were trampling his property. The chairman, Gregory Winslow, leaned back, dismissive, smirking like he was in control of the narrative. "Those roads are tight," Winslow said. "It happens." Curtis clenched his jaw. It wasn't accidents. It was a message. Yet every complaint, every plea for accountability bounced off walls polished with indifference. Some neighbors avoided eye contact. Others muttered excuses. None offered help. By the 5th mailbox, frustration had turned to anger. Renee tried to calm him at the dinner table, suggesting he move the mailbox closer to the house or just let it go. But Curtis refused. It wasn't about convenience. It was about respect. Every smashed mailbox whispered the same cruel line. "You don't belong here. Your property doesn't matter." Caleb, his teenage son, watched his father's tension grow. "Dad, do you think they're doing this on purpose?" Curtis didn't answer at first. Deep down, he already knew. That night, under the harsh glow of a single lamp in his workshop, Curtis began drafting a plan. Steel beams, Reinforced concrete and rebar became his allies. He sketched designs that would transform his mailbox from a fragile post into an unyielding fortress. Sparks flew as his welding torch cut through metal, each hiss and crack a vow. This wasn't just a mailbox anymore. It was a statement, a challenge, and a line drawn in the sand. Word of Curtis's plan spread. Sherman Hayes, the neighbor who had once offered quiet support, stopped by to watch. "You really think they'll let this slide?" Sherman asked, eyebrows furrowed. Curtis didn't flinch. "It's not about them," he said. "It's about me. If I don't protect my property, no one else will." Whispers among neighbors grew louder. Some admired his resolve, others branded him reckless. Yet Curtis knew he was already too far in to turn back. The days leading up to the installation were tense. Curtis mixed concrete in the wheelbarrow, poured it into the deep trench, and anchored the steel skeleton 3 feet into the ground. The smell of wet cement mixed with dust and sweat. Cedar planks were carefully arranged to disguise the fortified post, making it look ordinary to the casual eye, yet impervious to repeated assaults. Each night, as he wiped sweat from his brow, Curtis imagined the next patrol car that dared to come down his road. He could almost hear the crunch that would never come. By early June, the mailbox was ready. Curtis stood back, breathing in the Texas sun, feeling a mix of fear and defiance. He had built something that wasn't just wood and steel. It was a shield, a declaration that he would no longer be intimidated, ignored, or dismissed. He didn't know how the next encounter would unfold, only that it would be a reckoning, and when the patrol car finally came down his road again, the moment that followed would shock everyone. Neighbors, HOA board members, even Curtis himself. What happened next would push him into a confrontation nobody could have predicted. The afternoon sun blazed down on Curtis Delaney's ranch, the air thick with heat and tension. He was in the barn, oiling saddles, when the sound cut through the hoe. Quiet, a deep metallic thud unlike any he'd heard before. His heart raced as he dropped the rag and bolted outside. There it was, a white HOA patrol SUV, its hood crumpled, front bumper hanging loose, smoke curling into the sky. And standing in the dust, untouched and proud, was Curtis's mailbox, the steel and cedar fortress he had built with his own hands. The driver stumbled out, eyes wide, gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. Curtis approached slowly, boots crunching on gravel, every muscle taut. The man muttered something incoherent, stunned, as if he'd walked into a trap he never saw coming. Curtis didn't answer. He just stood there, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the moment settle over the gathered neighbors who had begun to emerge from their homes, drawn by the chaos. All at once, Curtis realized what this was, proof that he could no longer be silenced, no longer dismissed. Every broken mailbox, every ignored complaint, every smirk from Winslow's board members had led to this moment. The patrols had assumed their power was absolute, that their actions were invisible, that a black man on this stretch of Texas road would simply bend or disappear. But Curtis had drawn a line. He had reclaimed his space, his dignity, and with it sent a message louder than any words could carry. Neighbors whispered, some with awe, some with disbelief. Sherman Hayes shook his head, muttering, "I can't believe it. He actually did it." Even Edith Rowland, ever the skeptic, paused, squinting at the mailbox as if seeing it for the first time. Curtis's chest heaved, not with anger now, but with a raw, victorious relief. And yet in that victory, Curtis understood something deeper. This wasn't just about a mailbox. It was about respect, about recognition, about the refusal to let someone erase your presence because of who you or every day prior had been a test of patience, courage, and endurance. Every attempt to break him had failed. The driver of the SUV backed away, muttering apologies, shaking as Curtis's gaze held him in place. Curtis didn't flinch, didn't shout. He simply nodded, letting the reality sink in for everyone. He would no longer be intimidated. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the driveway, Curtis realized that the fight had changed. The mailbox had withstood the impact, but the confrontation had cracked something far bigger, the illusion of untouchable authority. A battle won, yes, but one that would ripple through the community far beyond this single street. What Curtis didn't know yet was that this act of defiance would spark conversations, whispers, and reckonings that no one, including the HOA, could ignore. The question now hung in the air, heavy as the evening heat. How far would they go to challenge? Him next? And would anyone finally stand with him when the storm came? For the first time in months, Curtis Delaney felt a quiet peace settle over his ranch. The mailbox stood firm, gleaming in the late afternoon sun, a symbol not just of wood and steel, but of resilience, dignity, and defiance. He no longer approached. The road with dread no longer counted the thuds and cracks of destruction. Instead, he had carved out a space where he could exist without fear, where his presence could no longer be erased by disregard or prejudice. Neighbors began to notice the change, not just in the mailbox, but in Curtis himself. The whispers turned to respect, the silent glances to acknowledgement. Sherman Hayes nodded at him knowingly at the feed store. Edith Rowland paused to comment quietly, and even those who had doubted him before seemed to realize that he had stood his ground not out of stubbornness but necessity. Curtis had turned harassment into a lesson, that ignoring injustice only empowers those who seek to harm, but the impact went beyond the boundaries of his ranch. Curtis understood in a way he hadn't before the toll of being dismissed because of who he was. Each flattened mailbox had carried a message. Each ignored complaint had whispered a deeper truth. Society often tests the resolve of those who are seen as other, those who are vulnerable to bias and prejudice. Curtis's fight with the HOA was a microcosm of a larger struggle, a fight for respect, for fairness, for the right to exist without fear of being silenced. Sitting on his porch with Renee that evening, the cicadas humming softly around them, Curtis allowed himself a quiet smile. He had defended his land, yes, but more than that, he had defended his humanity. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, while others might continue to resist or resent him, Curtis knew one undeniable truth. He had taken a stand, and nothing could erase that. This story isn't just about a mailbox or a ranch or even an HOA. It's about the courage it takes to assert your place in a world that too often dismisses you. It's about refusing to be made invisible, and about demanding the respect that should have been yours all along. So the question remains for all of us watching. How many more times will people be forced to fight for the simple right to exist? Without fear? And what will we do when it's our turn to stand?